What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over launchers, air launchers, hitting your opponent into the air, whatever you want to call it. The important part is we should be able to walk over to our opponent, hit them, send them into the air. They will go into an animation, such as like a launched or damaged animation, and stick on that frame until they hit the ground. Now, there are a few things here that we're not going to go over today. Like, for example, when you hit your opponent in the air, he won't go into a separate damage animation, but you will actually slow him down. That way you could do more combos on him. You should be able to see. After I hit him, he kind of starts falling a lot more slowly. We'll probably do this for the active player as well. It's not something you have to do. Some games have it, some games don't, so it's up to you based on preference. But we're going to go over it anyway. It helps make combos in the air a lot easier, and it can help make recoveries and frame perfect inputs also easier when it's slowed down a bit, so you can kind of think about what's going on. We won't get into the entirety of air combat today. In fact, we won't get into most of it. We'll just show this new move and kind of how we determine what should happen while they're hit in the air. We will have a separate video entirely on air combat for some of the more advanced mechanics. But let's start talking about how to launch our character into the air and also how to have different hitboxes. So something that a lot of people have been asking me about is, how do I have different hitboxes? All my hitboxes have the same function that they call. Well, we're going to use anim notifies. We'll get into it in a little bit, but you can have separate attacks, can have all sorts of different values, different damage, offset, hit stun, block stun, pushback, launch, and whatever else we end up adding in the future. So let's get into the code. Scroll back up all the way to the top. Here we go. As far as the code goes, we just have a few changes in the character class as well as the hitbox class as usual. So this is, I promise this is the last set of changes for the hitbox actor within the next few videos. I know we've been updating it every single time and we have to do the same process. But the hitbox should have as much information as needed, and considering fighting game attacks are so varied, it's important that they have a lot of information. We'll start with this since everyone probably knows the drill by now. If you are new to this series and are trying to do air combat or launchers or whatever, you might want to start over at episode 1. I know it's a far way back. This is episode 27, I believe, maybe 26, but one way or another, it's pretty far into the series here. And if you do, I'll leave an iCard in the top right corner. You can click on it, it'll bring you back to the very first episode. If not, let's go over launchers. So, launch distance. Alright, add this variable to your hitbox. And just like pushback distance, it's just going to be a float value that is going to be used to determine how much force we should apply, this time in the upward, or, depends on what axis you're using for your up axis. But your up axis direction, how much force is going to be applied to the character when they get hit by this hitbox. It's essentially what's going on here. You could also use this for for self forces. Like if you have an attack that you want to send yourself into the air when you can use this launch the exact same way. Just be careful with it. It can get a little hacky if you don't do that and have an animation to support it. But it is possible to use, and it can turn out very well if done correctly. In the CPP file for your hitbox actor, just make sure you set your launch distance to 0. That way when you get hit with a proximity box, it's default to 0, doesn't launch the player. In your character class, we're going to add one final state to here as well. And I know I also apologize for this because we keep adding states to this, but I keep thinking of them as we're going. Feel free to add as many as you want while you're here. Remember, unfortunately, when you add when you add a new variable or a new value to your enum class here, all your enum class usage in your anim BP will actually be reset. You can sometimes get lucky and that won't happen, but a lot of times that will happen, and all these will go back to not moving. So some of them are not moving, some of them are, like this one is jumping, this will say not moving. They all go back to their standard value, which honestly does kind of suck, and I apologize. But redo that, just reset your values in there. It won't like delete your anim BP or anything, but that'll happen after you build and then compile. And we're not going to do that just yet, but I'm just showing you. Remember to build and compile. It'll probably give you some errors in the anim BP, then go ahead and fix them up. You might have to close your editor for it to refresh the values in the enum. Okay. In your character class, we are going to add some stuff to landed. So if you didn't override this already, go ahead and do that now. Landed is from a character and a pawn. It's basically functionality to determine when the player has landed on the ground. They're landed on a surface as opposed to being in the air. We did override it before, but we didn't use it for all that much. We just kind of set the state back to default. We're going to add a little bit more functionality to determine when we should actually do this. Okay. Now, in your take damage function, go ahead and also add a launch amount. We had the pushback amount already. We want to add a float launch amount. I've been dispersing the variables in the function in my head for where I want to put them. I think this is good for take damage, so next time we'll probably have a new function to use when we have to add things here. For now, add this float to launch amount. There you go. And then once you have this this value in here, we'll be able to determine how far the player should be launched when they take damage. I don't do anything else in here other than add a gravity scale. So go ahead and add this. The comment says it, but basically it's the scaled value of gravity, which means gravity is a force in Unreal, and it's pulling the player down or toward, well, actually in Unreal it always pulls the player down. There's no inherent way to switch the gravity that I am aware of. You have to kind of manually do it, but essentially it's pulling the gravity down to the surface, right? That's the intention of it. What we want to do is be able to manipulate how strong that force is that's pulling us down. Because when you launch your player into the air, and you don't have to do this, you could keep it the same scale. But when you launch your player into the air, I put it to about a 0.7. That way they fall a little bit more slowly than when they jump. It makes it easier for the other player to come and jump at you after you've been launched, or for you to jump at launched players. And it also, again, allows you more time to recover and things like that. So it's not necessary if you don't want to. Again, some games do it, some don't. But here's how you do it in Unreal. So make a float gravity scale. Go into your CPP. In your constructor, we're going to set our gravity scale to get character movement gravity scale. You can feel free to do a check if get character movement here to make sure that this is valid. However, if the character exists, the character movement will exist. As you can see, they kind of use it freely up here as well. So you can do it as a safety check, but it will have problems and crash before this. So don't worry about it. Just basically get the gravity scale. What we're doing is we're setting the default gravity scale. So by default, it's 1, I believe. And we're setting it to that value. Once we go into landed here, remember we were setting our state to default when we hit the ground? Well, I added a little bit of functionality here because when you're working with forces like launch character does, it can sometimes cause an issue where it'll think you've landed without ever leaving the ground. So I went ahead and switched up the functionality to just do landed, or just perform the landed functionality if our current state is either launched or jumping, meaning we've either been hit into the air or we decide to jump into the air. We shouldn't do the functionality to set this back to default and change the gravity scale back at any other time. So that's the other thing here. Once we have landed, we want to set our gravity scale back to the gravity scale value that we set in the constructor. So this value is essentially, it's a placeholder. It's going to only hold the original gravity scale. We're going to be manipulating the character movement's gravity scale, but whenever we want to reset it, we're going to reset it back to this value. This works also because if we are to set the gravity scale on a certain character in Blueprint or something like that, then we don't have to know exactly what the value is. This will just keep track of whatever it was set to, and we can reset to that. So you can see we're doing it here. Once we've landed, we no longer want to have the slow gravity. We want to return to normal. So gravity scale equals the original gravity scale, essentially. And then we set our thing back to, our state back to default as usual. If you go down and go into the move right function, this part's also important, so just remember this. Now, when we apply pushback, and I should have mentioned this in the last episode, but we didn't apply a pushback amount great enough to cause this to happen. But if you have a pushback amount that is so large, it thinks you're moving right or left. It could actually change your character state to moving right or left, which you might not want. In my case, it was actually doing this when it thought I was moving right, because I was launching my character and launching and pushing them back, so they were getting quite a bit of distance. It was actually setting them back to the default state in the middle of the air. So what I did to combat this is, again, just make sure that they're not jumping or launched before performing this functionality, because you're never going to want to have the walking right or walking left or the idle animation in the air. You always have different air animations. So go ahead and add this extra safety check. Continue onward, we can go to our perform pushback function. So in perform pushback, we're just going to add some functionality to change the gravity scale and then launch the character with the launch amount. We'll get back into this in a second. I'm going to go over the take damage function first so you can see where the stuff is coming from. In take damage, make sure you add this float launch amount like we mentioned in the header file. Then, once you've done that, you can see after the player's been hit, remember we perform our pushback. Well, for the player that's landing the hit, we don't ever want to launch them again unless we want to do a manual launch, like an uppercut or something that actually takes them off the ground. If you want to do that, feel free to add a launch amount here. Otherwise, always keep this empty. And my apologies. Let me go over this. So remember I said add the launch amount to take damage. Make sure you add the launch amount to the perform pushback function too. That way we have the amount to launch them as well as the amount to push them back. So you can see here where I'm saying 0, this is where you would add the launch amount. In this case, since launch amount can easily be set to 0 if we don't want any launch, it's fine to pass the launch amount in when we're calling the perform pushback amount. There's no reason to check like if there's launch on this or if they're in a certain state. Basically, if they're taking damage and there's a launch amount, we can just launch them. You can add any additional rules you would like to this. But this is, remember, this is if they're getting hit and they're not blocking. We're not going to launch them if they're blocking. So when they are blocking, like this case, you can see I still perform the launch amount, but I actually shouldn't. So I just realized I did that. So see, I caught my own bug. When they're blocking, we don't want to launch them. If you want to launch them for any reason, then feel free to leave it. Otherwise, if they're blocking, the other player also shouldn't be launched because that just doesn't make any sense. There you go. So those are the 4 spots where the launch amount comes in. It's actually 0 for all of them. Out of the 4 cases, they're blocking and the enemy getting hit, or the enemy hitting them. The only time that launch should occur is if the player is taking damage, the character is taking damage, and they're not blocking. Then we're going to launch them. Now, in perform pushback, we can get back into this now. You can see if the player has blocked, then 0 here, this is the launch amount that we are giving them, because this is the Z value, and for us, Z is the up axis. So you can see the 0 value here means if they're getting blocked, if this attack was blocked, then the launch does not apply. We just flat out cancel it out. So it doesn't really matter if you give the launch amount when they're blocked or not. It's not really necessary. We shouldn't include it. So just say 0. The player should not get launched if they were blocking. Now, if they were not blocking, they took the hit, we're going to have to determine the launch amount and determine the scale. You're checking if the launch amount is greater than 0. Because remember, they can take a hit, not be blocking, and it's not an attack that launches them. So make sure that the attack is, or the launch amount is greater than 0 before setting their state to launched. But set their state to launch and then multiply their gravity scale by 0.7. Now, you can put any number you want here. This increases how long they will be in the air. It decreases their speed when falling. So feel free to change this to whatever value you want. If you make it 0.1, they'll be really slow. If you make it 10, well, they'll plummet toward the earth like a meteor. Just make sure you set them to be the character state launch that we just made. Okay, and then when we actually launch our characters right here, we want to use our launch amount for the z-axis. As opposed to here where we did 0, we want to use the launch amount. One additional safety check you should add is the end stun functionality here. So the stun in the air normally would set, or excuse me, the stun in general would normally set your character back to the default state when it's done. However, if you get stunned and you get launched, then you don't want to necessarily set your state back to default while you're in the air. That will look weird. It will bring you back to your idle position. You don't want that. So just in your end stun functionality, just check and make sure you haven't been launched. You could also check for if you're not in the jumping state. However, if we've done everything correctly, you shouldn't be able to be stunned and also jump, since can move is equal to false. So there you go. Alright, and that's all I've got for the code. There are a few things we have to do in the blueprint, as usual. So first of all, make sure you have a new attack, or some attack you want to use. You can use some of the air attacks we've already set up. That's perfectly fine. But if you're not using those, make sure you have one. Like, I didn't have one for idle attack, or excuse me, neutral jump attack, which is what this is. This is mutant neutral jump air kick started, or air kick. And then I have my anim notify. So let's go over how to make different hitboxes first. I think that's before we get into the state machine. So remember, we had these anim notifies that created the proximity box, deleted everything, and created the active hitbox. And it was just called attack active, attack started, and attack ended. Well, what you can do is actually just make new anim notifies. Right click, add notify, new notify. And whoops, I don't know what I clicked on. Clear hitbox is what I clicked on. That's not what I want. Anyway, you can click on, you can make new anim notifies for all your animations so that all your values can be different for every single notify. Now, once you make your new notify, set them up on your animation, and then in your anim BP, just call those notifies. So mutant, and these are all my notifies. I made this one by mistake, but these three are the ones I want. Right now, ended and started, I'm plugging into the same thing because for me, the proximity box is fine. You know, even if the position isn't quite right, which I believe it's pretty darn close. It doesn't really matter to me right now. And same with the ended. I just want you to delete all the hitboxes, so I don't have to do much with that. But the active is where it really comes in because you want to change the damage, potentially the offset. I didn't, but the hit stun, block stun times, and then your distances and such. Now, in create active hitbox, let's go into that. This is our function we were just talking about. We have to do what we always have to do, and we have to make sure we add our launch distance to the hitbox so we can actually get it to the take damage function. So, in your create active hitbox function, click on it, go to your inputs, hit plus to add a new variable, a new input parameter, make it a float, call it launch distance or whatever you want, launch amount, doesn't matter. Then, drag off a node. You can see this is launch distance. He's the bottom line here. And you can see I'm setting the launch distance variable in the hitbox. So this is the hitbox that we're spawning. This is the blue line, the result. Right here, you can tell this is the hitbox. So this variable we made, the launch distance variable, is the variable we're setting. I'm going to save here because I had something that was unchanged there, probably when I removed the code for the gravity scaling. But anyway, so we're setting our launch distance variable we made in the hitbox with the launch distance amount that we put into this blueprint function. Then, when we go into the hitbox BP, which I actually don't have up, so let me open that. Right here, hitbox actor BP. As usual, at this point when we're calling our take damage function, we want to use the launch distance variable that we just set in the hitbox in the launch amount for the take damage parameter. There you go. So now take damage will have the launch distance we give it based off of the value we apply here in the event graph of the anim BP. So this one's 900, this one's 400. Just a quick note, you can see I made 900 on this random attack. This is my standard attack, so it's not that this attack is like a launch attack, because it's really not. Just my basic attack. But I applied a lot on it so that I can get some good air with it. But the jump kick only applies about 400 force. That way it slows them down while falling. That way I could counter more. You know, I probably have some more moves I could do. Again, you could stop it entirely if you wanted. Just equal out the forces and they'll sit there in the air. Whatever you want to do with it. I chose to just give it a little bit of launch distance so it slows their falling down for you. But change it however you would like. Remove it for air attacks entirely. Make it 0 if you want. They'll just fall straight down. Whatever. Now let's go into our mutant style 1, which is my state machine. Let's start with what we've added that we've already done in the past. So this time I added a NJ attack, a neutral jump attack. So I can go to neutral jump from either start jump or end jump. Remember, end jump doesn't actually have much different right now, so start jump and end jump are just different animations in case I want to have different animations when I'm falling and rising. So in this case I actually took a frame from the start jump animation. So if I play this, I actually took the frame when I started falling for the end jump. You don't need that. It's just a nice little thing to have. So if you have two states for your jump, like start jump, end jump, then your jump attack might be able to only go from one of them. Like if you only want to be able to perform this attack before you hit the peak of your jump, or vice versa. But for me, I don't care, so I want to have it from both. But the logic is the same, so I made a shared transition, which is why they're green. But what it is I get my mutant character reference, and I say, was light attack used? Which basically means, have I pressed the G key? If I have pressed the G key, then I can go from jump, because remember, we're already in the air at this point, to my neutral jump attack. And my neutral jump attack is, remember, this one? The one I was kicking. I had the new anim notifies for. Then, when I'm done, I go to end jump regardless. You don't have to, again, but at this point, I shouldn't be raising anymore unless I use an attack that raises me up off the ground higher. So I'm going to go instantly into end jump, not back to start jump. And I'm just going to do it automatic rule based, because just when that animation is done, I can continue to end jump. Alright, then lastly, what we're going to do is we're going to go over the launched functionality. So we can only go to launched from idle right now. You could have some extra states in there or extra conditions in here. But what we're going to do is we're going to be able to go from launched to idle if we enter the state launched. So if the mutant character reference character state is equal to launched, then we can go into the launched state. This is our value in the enum that we just added. The launched animation is this guy. So I actually just have him kind of, this is actually the backflip animation, but I've cut it in a way that it seems to kind of just be like an uppercut, take damage animation, because he stays on this frame. You can always right click on your bottom slider bar here and remove frames if you want to cut any animations you have. Whoops. Well, it's fine. But anyway, once you're done with this, you can then go to from launch to idle. So for me, I just go from launch to idle if I'm not moving. And remember, I'm only not moving at this point. If we've been hit into the air, I only return to not moving. If I've landed, and landed only applies if we've been launched or we jumped. So I shouldn't return to not moving, or by not moving I mean VE default, which is called not moving when you look at it here. This is its technical name. We only return to default or not moving, same state, when we are either jumping or launched and then we land. That way we know if we have landed after we've entered the launch state, we will be not moving anymore. So once we land, we're good to return to idle. So you don't need any extra transition events here, but remember, every time you add a new attack, you should keep up with this. So when we go from start jump and neutral jump attack, make sure you have your start attack transition. Make sure you add it to both of your shared nodes if you decide to use shared, because it actually doesn't add notifications for you. One more thing about this. If you want to share transitions, this basically means the transition rule will be the same between them, since either way, it's just if was light attack used, you just click on it and hit promote to shared. It'll ask you to give it a name. I gave it neutral jump standard attack. And then when you click on one that doesn't have any shared, you can select it in the transition rules sharing. Lastly, you should probably put it to where end attack transition is here. I forgot to do that actually. So you can see this is what it should look like when you're ending an attack. This is what I did. That's bad. So make sure you add that there. Don't forget like I did. But that's pretty much it, guys. So we'll do one final test to kind of show what we've done and what we can do in the future. So when we hit this guy up in the air, again, we can kick him, and he still takes damage, and it slows his fall. Now, for the air combat tutorial, we will most likely want to slow our fall as well. That way we can combo them in the air and maybe do an auto combo. Now, a lot of games have a mechanic, a lot of fighting games have a mechanic where after you've hit an opponent so many times, it'll actually automatically break the combo, or essentially it'll make it to where you can no longer hit them, whether it be through gravity scaling like we were just doing. Like we changed the gravity scale here, but you could actually change the amount every time they get hit while they're in the air. You can also do, we have our pushback amount still, right? So once we push them, even when we're in the air, it actually pushes us back a little bit. Again, you could disable that if you like. But we could also do things like, once you've hit them so many times, we have to drop down. Our gravity scaling goes up. So even if they're in the air, we have to land. We can't just stay in here and negate gravity forever. We'll cover some of those mechanics in the next episode when we do air combat. Let me know if there's any others you think of. Even if this isn't the most recent video, like if you're watching this months ahead of time, or months after this has been out, I should say, then feel free to let me know any mechanics I may miss, or any mechanics you want to see regarding air combat, because there's a lot and they're different depending on the games. So I'm gonna, like I said, implement some slowing and some ways that you can't just infinitely combo them even with that. We can also do reversals and things like that out of the air, so they can recover and, you know, be able to jump out of it or be able to counter. There's a lot we can do. Anyway, guys, I think that's it for today's episode. That pretty much covers everything I wanted to. Basically covers all of launchers. So thanks everybody who's been waiting for this one, and my apologies that it took so long, but there's just a lot we had to put into place before we could get there. If you had any issues, feel free to join the Discord community. So we have a Discord that has got a lot of members now. I actually can't keep track. I think we got over 130 or so. The Discord community is meant to help you with any issues you've had while following this tutorial, as well as just meet other people who are trying to do the same thing as you. There's a lot of collaboration, so feel free to join if you're interested. I can't put in the iCard because YouTube doesn't like that, but it's in the description under Discord. If you guys would like to follow us on Twitch, we do Souls Wednesday and Resident Evil Friday. Souls Wednesday is where we play Dark Souls games, or Dark Souls-esque games like Bloodborne and Sekiro and things like that. And you watch me try and not die over and over again, but you know I am going to, and that's part of the fun of it. We also do some crazy things like put eye patches on and wear socks on our hands. If you'd like to go check us out on that, it's twitch.tv/Shawnthebro27. Lastly, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If it helped you, please subscribe. It's the most beneficial thing you can do to this channel. It basically lets me know that I'm doing a good job, that you're interested in the content. More importantly, you can see more of the content that's to come for this tutorial series and the other tutorials I have. So if you're interested, feel free to check them out, and thank you so much for watching this tutorial. I'll see you in the next one, guys, where we do some air combat. I'm Shawnthebro. Goodbye.